Hi, everyone. I'm really excited for this session to have Lena here to work with us on money and offer some of the experiences that she's had in hosting conversations around this topic. And it was really great to chat with Elena on making this relevant to the Impact Investing Fellowship. And I'm looking forward to exchanging with all of you on this. So let me hand it over to you, Lena, and you can walk us through how the day will go.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephen. Great to see you, and also great to see you on camera. This would be one of my invitations because it's not just, like intellectual passive input, but there will be moments, quite a few moments in this session that will be experiential. And of course, you're super free to decide whether you want to have your camera on or off, but particularly so when we go into more intimate and vulnerable share, it's usually much nicer to look at faces and not just pictures or names. So that just as a general invitation, and I'm super happy to be here, and to also offer this work, this personal money work, that is both a huge passion of mine, but also part of my profession, to offer it to you in that finance and impact investing sector. And I think it has, maybe I say a few words about me and then I'll say a bit more about the day. So I'll just briefly put some links into the chat. You don't need to click on any of them, but if you want to find out a bit more on what I do and with whom I work, you can do that there. So I work as a facilitator and a consultant, and kind of with this inquiry of how can we bring forward a more regenerative culture and regenerative organizations. I work with Greater Than, that's a collective of consultants and coaches and facilitators, and we support organizations and startups, on their journey to realize these values around regeneration, around decentralizing power and all of that within, in their organizational structure. And things like self-management and so-called new pay are included in that. But of course, it's not limited to that. And actually, what we call the personal work or the personal transformational work is a huge part of this kind of systems change. And they kind of go hand in hand. And you cannot, at least I haven't seen it, that you cannot really do one without the other. And then I host also outside of this context, I host experiences partially related to money, partially around bringing interdisciplinary change makers and leaders together to move towards what I would call a future worth living for. And maybe as a last piece, something that it's like a core pillar in my life that I'm not getting paid for, but that I invest a lot of time into is community building and in the sense of co-living, building co-living projects. And I'm really glad to bring at least some of these parts also into this call. Okay, so you read a little bit probably in the invitation what money work is. It's practices and approaches that help us to uncover our beliefs, our patterns, our stories around money, especially those ones that are kind of unconscious and buried deep within us, and to bring more awareness to these parts to create kind of a space of choice, both on a personal as well as on a professional level. And as I already said, like personal work and systems change, for me, they come together. And I assume that you're all here in this fellowship and in the broad realm of impact investing because you are yearning for some of our systems to change. And because you want to see money flow in alignment with your values and with values that are life affirming and life-giving rather than extractive and depleting and dominating. And at the same time, we all have been, almost all of us, I'm aware that we grew up in various different contexts and especially like culturally, language-wise, and so on. And I want to acknowledge that. And at the same time, capitalism is a global thing. It's hard to escape it. So there is a high likelihood that we somehow inherited and kind of ingested some of the patterns that, yeah, that play out in capitalism, and they also play out in us. So in order, my theory of change, at least part of it, is that in order to, dismantle capitalism on the outside and really find new economic systems and build them, we also need to dismantle it on the inside. And that's kind of the context that we're coming in with. Briefly going to give you an overview over the session today. So in a moment, you're going to have a longer check-in in triads to really kind of familiarize yourselves with this topic of money. Then I am gonna give some kind of frontal impact, not impact, input, and give you a little presentation to give some context, to give some perspective of where I'm coming from, what are the learnings I'm bringing into the space. There is going to be some space for questions, and then we're going to spend about half an hour in the end for, again, more experiential learning. So really working, like going into money work, basically. And of course, it's totally up to you in what of these parts you want to participate. Anything I suggest is an invitation. So yeah, go as deep as you want, or stay as shallow as feels right. It's really up to you, and there is no expectation from my end. And maybe I will say that as well, that when we touch on these topics like personal money stories, we won't record that part, by the way. So you will be in breakouts. We will maybe have a short harvest here in the group, but that will just stay here. We won't record it. And I ask for confidentiality as well, so that we don't go out of this room telling other people about what has been shared here. Of course, you're super free to share about your own experience, but please leave like names and identifying details and all of that in this room, because then we all have this, it may become easier for us to really bring ourselves more fully. Can we do like a raise of hands or something if you agree with that? I see hands. Okay. Maybe, okay, people raise their hands. Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, then with that, I would love for you to move into the check-in. Is there a question, or is it still a raised hand from, it's an agreement? Okay, perfect. I have some questions for you in the check-in, and again, you might not have all the time, and you have like 12 minutes in breakout rooms, so you might not answer all of them. So pick the ones where you feel like there's energy. The first one is around, what role does money play in your life? What does it make possible? What problems does it cause? And if you feel like it's more of a turn on for you to look at that in your organizational context, then please do that. And then the second question is like, have you been in touch with money work before? And if yes, what did you learn? And if no, what does it evoke in you being kind of confronted with it now? Okay. Are we good to go into breakout rooms? Okay, there are 2 people joining. Maybe I'll briefly brief them. I think Roselle and Beth, you just joined. I'll repost. You can jump straight into a check-in in triads, and I'll repost the questions into the chat. So you should be able to read them on your own. And with that, I would say, yeah, you can jump into breakouts.
Okay, great. I'm going to open up the rooms. And Lena, if you want to join one, it's an open up for you. I'm going to pause the recording now. Okay. I'll move you out and exchange with myself. All right. Enjoy.
Again. Wonderful. I hope you landed a bit more with this topic. Maybe we can put just one word into the chat on how are you feeling right now, or what's alive. Just one word, so we get a little bit of a kind of kaleidoscope view of what's present in the room. Curious how money is related to family, values. I feel quite energized. Stephen and I exchanged. Ambiguity, culture, constrained, enlivened, stimulated. Beautiful, thank you. With this, I'm going to move us into, just giving you a little bit of a presentation. And I'll need a second to set up my screen well so you can see what I want you to see. Okay, can you all see the presentation? Maybe I can get a thumbs up. Perfect, great. Thank you. And it's also big enough? Yeah, okay, great. All right, so I'm super excited to be speaking to you about money work. And in a very broad sense, I understand it as the work that is needed to make the shifts on a consciousness level that are needed if we really want to move towards a more value-aligned money culture and economy. Yeah. And obviously this topic is huge, and I will talk maybe for 20 minutes. So we're just touching on the surface, and to me this is kind of the beginning of a conversation, and like a spark that might catch onto something within you. And so I invite you not only to listen with your mind and your intellect, but also with your heart and your body, and see if somehow they maybe have different messages for you as you're receiving this information. And as I said, there will be some Q&A time at the very end. So please, put a note in the chat or remember your questions if you have any. And the way I will speak about it is also from lived experience. And this is important to me because I only want to speak about the things that I can kind of validate, and that I have experienced. And for that to be possible, there's really a whole lineage of thinkers and practitioners and teachers that I want to honor. And amongst them are people like my colleague Francesca Pick from Greater Than, but also really visionary thinkers like Mickey Cashdan or Charles Eisenstein. And I also want to name and honor the lens that I'm speaking from. So I'm coming from a white Western middle class context, and I'm sitting here as a queer woman who also has never been like properly employed. So I don't know, the corporate treadmill inside out, which might again influence how I'm sitting here and how I will be speaking about things. And as I said, I'm part of Greater Than, and also Greater Than has been a huge learning ground and influence for me, and kind of the space to make a lot of these experiences next to the land-based community projects that I'm part of. And just a few words about Greater Than. So I said we explore regenerative organizing, what that can look like. And we support things like alternative compensation systems, but also personal money work. And I think one thing that I really want to emphasize is that we really walk the talk, and we don't just theorize about, an alternative money culture and progressive money practices, but we live them, whether that be how we distribute the funds amongst us, or how we make decisions about the commons, or how we support each other in exploring our beliefs and conditionings around monies. And here are some of our core values on the slide. And of course, we try to realize them also when it comes to money. And I think the second one particularly so is focused on that, in the sense of values recognized and distributed in a healthy, regenerative way that's very, very easily relatable to money. But I like to think also of what would our money practices and decision-making processes look like if they were to enhance the thriving of caring relationships and human development. You can actually take all of these values and see how do they apply within the money context. And one of the things, as I said, that we do in Greater Than is we facilitate personal money work. And there's a format that I host inside and outside of Greater Than. It's called the Money Game. It's a game where you literally play with real money. And it confronts you quite effectively with your beliefs and patterns around it in a playful way. I really love it as a tool. And I'm telling you this because a couple of months ago, a participant sent a message to me saying, I've been through the money game twice now. And today, for the first time, I was able to adjust my relationship to money enough to negotiate a relationship that made sense. And it felt amazing. I literally cried. It gave me permission to be present in the relationship. And what I hear when I read that is that this person, what they experienced is all of a sudden they had more choice. They had more choice to actually negotiate an authentic relationship to money and to another person. And I think this is also, like, why are we even talking about money? And the way I see it is it's this huge field of untapped potential, because the broad majority across nations and across cultures with a very homogeneous behavior and practices around money, things like trade and exchange. If I go into a store and get something, I have to pay, or if I do some work, I will get paid. And I know that there are exceptions to that, particularly so when we're closer to indigenous contexts and cultures. Yeah, a colleague of mine recently brought some examples from Nigeria, which I really loved hearing about. And there is also some beautiful storytelling in a book called Hospicing Modernity. So I can really recommend that. But most of our world is very much kind of influenced by Western capitalist values and behaviors. So that's what I mean when I say homogeneity. And there is this lack of alternatives or choices. Yeah, like if I want to work in a corporate, I got to get a salary. And an analogy that I really like is, still in a Western context, we move back 150 years ago and look at relationships, romantic partnership. And back then, there was basically one model and one model only, and that was the heterosexual monogamous marriage. And if you wanted to be in partnership, that was the way. And people had many different interests, often economic interests, and they moved into that. And we fast forward to today, and all of a sudden I find myself in this kind of landscape of possibility, like I can be in a romantic relationship without getting married. I can be in a romantic relationship with multiple people if I want to. I don't have to be in opposite sex relationships. I can be in career relationships. So, and this kind of field of possibility, this is what I long for when it comes to money. And that is not to say, like heterosexual monogamous marriage is outdated or something like that. But all of a sudden, it's not the only path anymore. And I can kind of look at what is in alignment with my values and my authenticity. And it's an analogy, yeah, like it's not perfect. You probably can't translate it one to one on money, but to give you a sense of what I mean when I say like I want to have a sense of choice and choice of practice and behavior. And yeah, I think a big part of moving towards that space of choice is to question the status quo. And I see it a lot, especially within myself. So when I'm saying these things, it's not like I'm better than those who haven't questioned it yet. I'm speaking about things that I meet in myself as well. So things like salaries, yeah, like we assume that salaries are a mandatory part of business. But when we kind of double click and we start questioning them, you could wonder, like, why does somebody else get to decide how much money I earn, how much money I deserve, Like, how would they know how much money I actually need? Yeah. And here I want to give you also a bit of a few kind of things you can try on or try out. And as I said, I think that like questioning the status quo and really looking at what are the things that I just assume as a given and what are the things that I don't think can be changed. And it goes kind of hand in hand with cultivating imagination. I really, really believe in the power of imagination, because if we can envision a different way, even if it's of something that seems so difficult to change, we have something to move towards. And even if the steps are small, we can start identifying them, rather than if we don't have a vision at all, there's also nothing to move towards. Yeah, we just stay with what is. And kind of nested within that, you can see that there's this know thyself. So what I said in the very beginning of really understanding your own patterns and conditioning, and seeing how do you kind of keep the status quo alive within you, or where do you actually embody your values? Where do you wish that you yourself or the world would be different? And I'm not asking these questions so that we start shaming and judging ourselves. That's really, really not the point, because I think especially within the systems that we live in, we do live in a capitalist reality. It will be very difficult, if not impossible, to be perfectly adhering to values of regeneration or equity or whatever it is that is important to you. So it's not about judgment, it's really more about like curious inquiry and being real with ourselves and just not bullshitting ourselves. Yeah. And we looked a bit at the individual level, and I do want to move us a little bit more towards the collective level. And as I said, we support organizations and teams to, for example, design compensation systems. And also within the money game, it keeps coming up. It's that concept of fairness. Yeah. It's such a recurring theme. It keeps to be such a reference point, and people want to understand how to move money and resources in ways that are fair, not only for themselves, but for the whole group. And they use usually fairness as their reference point. But the problem with fairness is that it's quite a flawed concept, because similarly to money, we pretend that it's this rational, objective thing, when really it's super emotional and very subjective. And what we believe to be fair, and really what we feel to be fair, because really often fairness is this, it's more like an intuitive sense. Yeah, like, oh, this is fair and this isn't fair. It depends so much on our upbringing and our cultural context, and also our personal wounds. And I think there is a huge opportunity here, because if we kind of take fairness apart, what we find underneath is a set of values. And there's this opportunity to kind of make the implicit explicit. So we're taking the implicit values that inform our understanding of fairness, and we're naming them. And by naming them, we can also start seeing, like, wait a second, are these actually the values that I stand for? Or is it something that I like took over from my parents or from school or from work? And to kind of then adjust, it's not even adjust our understanding of fairness, we kind of just discard the concept of fairness and we move towards values. And I think that's also really interesting, especially you can do that within your organizations or within your teams, because you can like start speaking about your core values, your own core values, but also your group's core values, and then have a look at your the decisions you make around money, how money is being distributed, whether you have salaries, and see if the systems that you have in place to make those decisions actually reflect these core values. And I want to say that, like, if you, I'm just going to give you some examples, because if your values are, let's say, you really value innovation and growth, then it might make total sense for you to distribute money on the basis of meritocracy. But if your values are inclusion and solidarity and equity, then it might actually, wouldn't it be great if also your salaries, how they're being decided or how money is being distributed and flowing within the organizations, if they would reflect that? And then you also shift from this atmosphere of like everybody having a different understanding what is fair, to people being able to relate to the systems kind of in accordance to the underlying values. As long as they hold those values themselves, they will likely be able to relate to it. One breath. I think this is a lot of content, and I don't want to overwhelm you. Yeah, and what this leads me to is basically an insight I had over and over again, and that is, if you put the right thing, quote unquote, at the center of a system, the people in it will pick up on it. They will orient towards that. And right now we have things like individual profit, amongst other things, of course, at the center of our system. So that is what people orient around and towards, whether kind of consciously or subconsciously. And I've literally seen this transform if you put something like happiness at the center of our shared financial decision makings. And it's quite incredible what the shift is. And I'll use the example of a practice that we call the happy money story. So the happy money story is how we distribute funds within Greater Than, usually on a project basis. So we have income streams. We work on a project in small teams. So we do this practice, let's say 2 to 6 people, like still relatively small configurations. And we use this practice to determine who gets how much money in the end of that project. And the beauty of it is that everybody involved actually has a say and a voice in how that money is being distributed. So it's not like anybody gets a regular salary. And the only premise of this practice, it's a consensus-based practice, is that everybody will be happy in the end with the decision. And what this leads to is that all of a sudden you have a mindset of collaboration and of generosity, because I'm not sitting there anymore asking only, will I get the most, or will I get enough? But I'm sitting there knowing that whatever I propose should make everyone happy. And something I like in particular about this is that it really acknowledges also the subjective emotional reality of money. It's not just numbers, and there's not so much objectivity anymore. And you will find, like, we find ourselves quite often in the situation that somebody says, like, so what number feels right, So we're also working with that feeling dimension, which I think is quite radical when it comes to money, because it's rarely ever treated with that kind of approach. And one other really big thing I learned from the happy money story is just how many needs we fulfill through money. Needs that have really nothing to do with money itself. Yeah, in our current world, we need money to, pay our rent and buy our food, usually in most cases. But really often money is a placeholder, or it becomes a placeholder for us feeling seen and heard, or for us feeling free and confident or purposeful. And that's why also there's this story element in the happy money story, because actually everybody gets to speak about their story around what happened. And I won't get into the details now. I will link to articles that you can, if you're interested in this practice, you can really read a lot about how it works. I'm also happy to answer some questions. But what this story basically allows for is that I get my need for feeling seen and heard and maybe acknowledged and appreciated met independently from how we distribute the money. And then there is kind of more space created for distributing the money based on our shared values and perhaps based on our needs, like we can actually have a conversation about needs. And that leads me also to this question of, so if our values are interconnection and regeneration, what does that mean for the money systems we design? What do we put at the center? Yeah. And I want to come back to Mickey Cashton that I mentioned in the beginning, because she suggests, always a really difficult thing to say in English, she suggests that we move more and more towards what she calls a needs-based approach, and not only a needs-based approach to money, but to life. So we're kind of centering the individual human's needs in our thoughts, in our language, in our system. And this approach comes from nonviolent communication, where needs are one of the inherent things that you take into account when speaking about something. And of course, like, this is very human-centric, you could easily throw in the needs of nature into the mix as well, yeah, if we really want to generate a holistic thing. But I think it's radical what that leads us to, because in our current world, you basically never get anything because you need it, yeah? You get things because you provide something. And I briefly want to read a quote from her, because I find it really inspiring and moving. Because she says, "In the world of my dreams, we provide for everyone's needs, not because they deserve it, not because they have done something to earn it, or possess the resources to ensure that others will provide for them. Rather, in that world, we provide for everyone's needs because those needs exist. It is none other than a basic reverence for life." And I think what this expresses is exactly that. Yeah, like what happens, that it's for me so closely related to regeneration. What happens if we put life at the center of all our systems and all our doing? And how can life thrive? And I do think that there is this element of, yeah, like if we really connected to our heart, and this might sound a bit esoterical, but there is this, like, when we really meet each other as on a human level, where we recognize the humanness of each other, then how could we not want anyone to have the basic needs for shelter and food, for love and acknowledgement, also the need for self-actualization and a purposeful doing, as well as rest. How could we not want these needs to be met? Yeah. And something's going on with this presentation, because I do want to give you a few more things that you might want to be doing in the context of group. Give me 1 second. Okay. I'll briefly share my screen again, and you will have to see this last slide differently. So basically, I think what could be interesting for you in organizational context is, or network context, yeah, it doesn't have to be a business, is to look at your collective financial decision making processes, but also how does money flow? Who makes those decisions? And then kind of in parallel, speak about your values, what I mentioned before. Like, do you have a shared understanding of your values? Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? And then likely you will see that there is a gap between your reality, how you move money, and what your values are. And I want to say that this gap is okay. Like, this gap exists, I think, everywhere. And I don't think that, not even within Greater Than, where I do think we're really, like at the forefront of experimenting with these things, I don't think we have found it yet. And that's why the last point is to start experimenting, because I really think that in the face of such big challenges, like, overcoming capitalism or the climate crisis that we're facing, I do think that this can be overwhelming. And I think, like, we do not know yet how to completely do it differently. But what we can do is we can look at what are the things, the experiments that are within our capacity, that are bringing us, even if it's just an inch closer to where we want to be going. And for me, there lies tremendous hope there, in these experiments. And as long as we do them, we also have a chance to continue to develop them. Yeah. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, resonances also, like something that moved you, please feel free to unmute. I didn't follow the chat at all, so if there's anything that I should know, maybe Stephen, you can tell me.
Yeah, I'd be happy to pull out a few things, but
Cool.
it's a very active chat. So I think that means that it has moved something in quite a few people, and maybe some
Beautiful.
people do want to respond, Lena.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, feel free to unmute if you wanna, if you have a question or a comment.
Can you share a little bit about the money game?
Yeah, sure. Barika, you just asked this, right? Yeah, great.
Yes, I do.
Um, I won't share too much because the whole thing lives a lot from, let's say, the surprise effect. I mean, we're hosting them. You can do them in person and online. On the 22nd of April, we'll host another one, and I will share the link in case this is interesting to you. The foundation is that you come together with a group of people who each bring an amount of money that you deem meaningful. Yeah, that if you would lose it, it would not harm you, but it would also not feel like super comfortable. And why that is because um, then you have a chance to actually trigger some learning, yeah, some deeper learning, and to really get to the nitty-gritty. And I think what it provides, because we rarely play with money unless in like casino contexts where it's not very, I don't think it's very has a very evolutionary aspect. Yeah, like we don't discover a lot about ourselves in a casino context. Maybe we do, but I don't know. I've never done it. But in that case, you have a very structured safer space to try out behavior, and to really be present with what happens if money moves away from me, what happens if I receive money. So there is this yeah, you're confronted with these things in real time. Yeah. Is this helpful? Okay. Anything else?
Can you share a little bit about some of the research in this area as well?
I'm not a big I have a colleague who works in with research. I mean, who writes her PhD in the context of self-organized contexts. Um, I'm not a big research person actually. So a lot of the way I look at it is very experience based. So I can tell you about kind of my own research in the sense of like what have I seen through hosting a significant number of these games or of these spaces. Um, Let me see if there's anything relevant there that might be interesting for you. I think the main thing I can say, and it's also a learning from the money game, is that people actually care a lot for each other. Like if you have a system that allows for mutual care in a very easy and convenient way, it happens. But because we don't have a system that is really designed for mutual care, it doesn't happen so much. So I often yeah, I don't think we're necessarily, I think we could experience a lot more solidarity if we had systems that would support solidarity much more practically in our everyday life. That's one of the insights I have. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a comment. I mean, yeah, this was lovely. Thank you for sharing as well. I don't know, there's a lot there. And I think if I saw the presentation, again, I'd have specific comments, and you had some examples that were my ADHD brain is like going off the wire. I can't even remember what it was about specifically, but there is something that you brought up some examples that I thought were intriguing. But as a fellow queer person, I also view the world as potentially like going down this line. I would love to see that. And I think if we had queer communes and folks like that in our society, developing society, I think it's possible. But I think people are so far gone down a narrative that has been developed over generations of status quo thinking and colonialism, imperialism, whatever it may be. It's hard for me to think about how to develop that narrative shift of one, even like the concept of happiness, what that is for most people is, I mean, I think a lot of us on this call probably understand or have a mutual understanding of what happiness can look like, and it comes from like developing purpose and all these other things. But I don't necessarily know how to get folks who are down the rabbit hole of consumerism. Like, do you just set up pockets of examples of this, or how does this structurally work at some point? Like, yes, to think about money differently, perhaps from an organizational level is certain, but then there's also the legal aspect and everything like that. And what is actually viable is perhaps a lot more complex. So that is something I'm intrigued by. Because I agree with everything you said. It's not like I'm disagreeing with anything you said. It's just the viability of it and how to develop something in like systems that are kind of like imposed upon us by birth is kind of difficult for me. I don't know if anyone else is challenged by that, but I'm intrigued.
Totally. I mean, yeah, definitely. I think I see some nodding and some raising of hands. I think this kind of constant discouragement is something that I live with in a way, like this realization, or like all these questions that you ask, like how do you bring that? And the answer is I don't know. I think the best pathway I found, and I would not claim it as either the only one pathway or the right pathway. Maybe I'm like totally down the wrong road, but the pathway that I find right now to be the most meaningful one is that what you described, like developing pockets. And I do believe in some sort of ripple effect. And I also think that if you build better systems within a system that is shitty, people will eventually switch over. Will it actually work like that? I don't know. I really don't know. But I have hope, and that moves me forward. Yeah, Sanita.
Hi, Lena. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful, and it is actually quite similar to some of the work that I'm doing on the site with a professor. It's a project called Money Matters, and yeah, it's about systems change from like personal finance perspective, because we do live in a world that is capitalistic. So yeah, one of the struggles that we faced during the program was to encourage the acknowledgement that we do. So like the necessity to earn money is to do stuff that aligns with our values. Nobody, like we have families to care for. We have things we want to do in our personal lives that gives us fulfillment, and that's usually the crux of why we want to earn money. But then being in a system that does not reward solidarity, we kind of lose sight of that goal. But we have been sort of struggling with getting people to be vulnerable in that space and trying to elicit those epiphanies almost, that yeah, we are working towards values, but we are lost in a system that rewards capitalism. In your experience, what has sort of worked in unlocking that vulnerability or unlocking that sort of conversation where we recognize that yeah, it is definitely our values, and yeah, the system is shitty?
I don't think I usually face the spaces I'm in or I'm hosting. That's not often a challenge I face, the lack of vulnerability. I'm often surprised actually by how willing people are to open up if there is a space given and an invitation. And I would love also to hear, like Stephen just wrote it in the chat, I would love to hear what the program is and the context, like really, really would love to know. The questions I think I would ask is like kind of what keeps them from being vulnerable? Like what do they feel like they still have to protect in such a space? That doesn't allow them to bring kind of the more shaky parts. And I think only from making theories of what is it that they still feel like they need to protect, or because I think usually like if we are not vulnerable, we are usually in some sort of defense mode. Yeah, like what are people scared of exactly? Like, and I think if we understand that better, or if you would understand that better, then I'm sure you will find interventions that can kind of meet that. I think confidentiality is a huge one though, like knowing that, and agreements in general. I think having clear agreements of what kind of space you're offering, I find that helps a lot. Yeah. Okay. Maybe
Yeah.
one more question, and then we could move towards the more experiential part, because I'm also excited about that. Thanks, Anita. Cool. Great.
Thank you, Lena.
Okay. There's nothing, that's also fine. Then we'll move to the next part, and I'll briefly introduce you. What we're going to do is a practice called My Money Life Story. And you'll get to spend some time kind of exploring, where did you learn about money from? And what does it represent? What does it mean for you? Or what has it meant in the past? And I'll just briefly share my screen. So basically, in a moment, if you haven't gotten pen and paper yet, it would be amazing if you could grab it, but you have like quite some time for the solo exercise. So if you don't have it yet, then just get it once we get started. So basically what I invite you to do is to draw a circle on your piece of paper. And this top moment, yeah, represents your birth. So this is your life clock, okay? So this is your birth, and all the way, this is not your death, but this is kind of where you are now. So this circle represents the whole of your life until here. And the invitation is, there are some questions that you get to examine. So what is a memorable moment related to money in your life? And what did money represent in that instant? So basically, I challenge you to go back to your first memory of money ever. Yeah, see if you can travel all the way back. Maybe you were 6, maybe you were 4. Doesn't really matter. For me, it was kind of playing with coins. And back then, I think money represented play, playfulness and fun. So you make a little mark here on the side of the circle, and you write the moment in your life on the outside. So for me, would be playing with the coins with my sister. And then on the inside, you write what money represented in that instance. Yeah. And as you go through this, I think questions that can help you kind of go a level deeper or find particular memories is, how did your parents or the circle that you grew up in relate to money? Your primary caregivers, I think is the correct way of saying it. How did they relate to money? And how has money shown up in your own life over time? And another question, sometimes what you will encounter is that there are these base sentences of like, I have one that's like, whoever has more gives more. I'm not sure if my parents ever said that, but this is this like super present belief that I have around money. So you'll have about 8 minutes to draw the circle and kind of travel through time, travel through your life. And then afterwards, you'll have a moment also to debrief in diets. So with one other person about this exercise. Are there any questions, or is it clear how it works?
Can you put it
Maybe,
up again?
yeah, or just post the questions into the chat.
Yeah, I am about to do that. Thank you. Any other question?
Can you show the circle again?
Sure, I can show the circle again. 1 second. So basically, this is the circle. Here's your birth. The whole circle represents the whole of your life. On the outside, the memorable moment, and on the inside, kind of thinking of what did money represent in that moment. Is it clear? Okay. Can I stop sharing? I'll stop sharing. Good. I'll play some music for you too.